and eddies, trout are rising over the mayfly, and the sun is shining down on the valley. Hope to be a fly fish till the day that I die. Spring has thawed out the long bitter winter. The water is clear and the skies are blue. I'm standing in the middle of the Beaver Kill River. Might even catch and release one or two. Well, some folks like horses, cats or dog. Me, I like fishing with a rod and a fly. Yes, fishing is a favorite pastime of mine. If I couldn't do it, I think I would cry. Well, life is good when I'm wading a river. It gets even better when I cast a fly. If I catch a trout, it don't really matter. It's fun just to be here and give it a try. Trout is rising in the far eddy. I make a false cast, then take my aim. If he takes the fly, I feel so much better. And if he doesn't, I'll feel no shame. Stoneflies and caddis and the riffles are plenty. Mayflies courting on fragrant breeze. And cedar wax wings come down from the heaven, wait for their dinner up in the pine trees. The water is cold and my waders leak, and it's raining now on my favorite stream. I'll bear it all, just fish with a feather, so when I sleep I will have a sweet dream. And life is good when I'm wading a river. It gets even better when I cast a fly. If I catch a trout, it don't really matter. It's fun just to be here and give it a try. Oh, ripples and waves, pools and eddies, trout are rising for the mayfly, and the sun is shining down on the valley. Hope to be a fly fish till the day that I die. Yes, I hope to be a fly fish till the day that I die.
Hello, I'm Joan Wolfe. I'd like to invite you to take a few minutes to learn how to give the trout you release their best chance at survival. John and Dusty were just about to call it a day.
I got one.
They're glad they didn't.
Get ready now. Here it comes.
Get him, Dad.
That's some fish, Dusty.
Indeed it was.
You think he's been caught before?
Could be. We released a few this morning.
If this trout could only talk, it might tell the boy it had been caught not once, but 2 other times. And though the anglers who caught the fish released it for different reasons, they all had something in common. They knew how to help the fish survive its release. And it all started 3 years ago.
Oh, quite another little one.
The trout's first encounter with a hook could have been the most dangerous of all.
Is that your bait or the fish?
Very funny, mister. I haven't caught a trout yet.
Most trout easily survive being lightly hooked in the mouth, but this was more serious because the fish was caught by all 3 of the treble's hooks.
A little hungry today, weren't we?
Some people might have jerked the undersized fish around, handled it roughly, and kept it out of the water a fatal period of time. But this angler was different. She kept the fish in the water as much as she could, and because her lures had hooks with small barbs, it was easier for her to back out each hook point.
Here you go, little guy. Hope to see you again next year.
I think we should release him.
Are you sure? There aren't many around like this one.
Do you think he'll live?
I think he has a good chance of living. You brought him in quickly, and it's only lightly hooked.
This fish knew all about being hooked deeply. 2 years ago, it had its second bout with a hook. If the fish had been caught in the feeder creek just upstream, it would have been that night's dinner.
Don't tell me you're not big enough.
But this section of the river had a 12-inch size limit.
You wouldn't want to stretch a half-inch, would you? I guess not.
Luckily for the trout, the man valued the fish's welfare more than a 5-cent hook.
Now why'd you go and swallow that all the way?
As soon as the fisherman saw the fish had swallowed the hook, he knew what he had to do. If he tried removing the hook, the fish would almost certainly die. He also knew that 2 out of 3 deeply hooked fish will survive if the line is cut. So without a tug, he simply snipped the line next to the trout's mouth
Done everything I can for you, buddy.
and let nature take its course.
Hope you make it.
And so the trout...
Grab him right through the net. Hold him gently but solidly. Right. That will confuse him, so he won't struggle so hard.
This trout had survived 2 close calls with anglers and many more against natural predators, and now it was lucky once more. Today, the fish wasn't too small. It was just in good company. You too should consider proper release. Practice these CPR tips so the trout you return to the water will have their best chance of surviving. Rule 1 is don't play fish to the point of exhaustion. Trout need all of their energy reserves to survive the stress of being caught. Second, use a landing net, preferably one with a knotless cotton mesh, even on the small trout. Think of your net as a third hand. It will help you control the fish and shorten the time needed for handling. Third, firmly grasp the fish across the back, just behind the head, avoiding the gills. This is a solid area on a trout. Then turn the fish upside down. Fish in this position become disoriented and struggle less, allowing you to remove your hook quickly and safely. Fourth, don't even try removing swallowed or deeply embedded hooks. Instead, quickly size up how you've hooked your fish and act accordingly. Without pulling on the line any harder than you have to, snip the line at the mouth and let the fish go. And finally, keep fish in the water as much as possible. One recent study has found that the longer trout are kept out of the water, the more they are likely to die from damage to their fragile gills.
Let's see, the highlight of this morning of fishing was when you released that big fish.
I'll say. I guess you could say that I recycled it. Kind of like this can.
As Lee Wolf once said, a good game fish is too valuable to be caught only once. And the fish you release is your gift to another angler, as it may have been another angler's similar gift to you. This can only happen if we release fish in the safest way. Thanks for watching, and good fishing.
have to fish with anymore. Okay, welcome to today's show. You just saw a video by Joan Wolf on how to release a fish, which is very important. Somebody was talking to me just the other day about catch and release fishing and how silly it must be, but catch and release fishing is simply a trout is worth more than to be caught once, you know. I like to go fishing. I like to catch fish. It's not about eating fish. If I want to eat fish, I'll just go to McDonald's or someplace like that. But as far as I spend so much on fly tying and fly fishing, and I do everything for, it's the act of catching the fish. It's fly fishing. It's not eating, fly eating. I don't like to eat flies myself, but it's fly fishing. So catch and release fishing is simply catching your trout. That's the act of the hunt. You catch your fish. You admire your fish for a very short time. Keep them wet. Keep them in the water. Release the hook. Use barbless hooks when you can, and then let the fish go. All right. So that fish can be caught again by somebody else. And that's what's important here. We need to protect the resource by cleaning up our environment, by working in the environment, designing streams so that when they do flood, they work for us and protect the habitat and property and life for people as well as the trout. And that's important. But catch and release fishing is one of the simplest ways to create a great fishery. So I hope you enjoyed the rest of today's show, and we'll see you next week.
New York City has the world's largest unfiltered water supply. Right now, the natural gas industry wants to drill in our watersheds. The process is called hydraulic fracturing. It uses over 900 chemicals injected under the ground, combined with explosives that cause mini earthquakes to extract the gas. But the process hasn't been proven safe. Watersheds across the nation have been contaminated with plastics, carcinogens, mutagens, and endocrine-disrupting chemicals, and with explosive natural gas. Whoa! This cannot be allowed to happen here. Join Scott Stringer, Manhattan Borough President's Kill the Drill campaign, because we can't drink natural gas, and because there's no New York without New York water.
And that, to me, is the most alarming environmental news I've heard in a long time, and makes this the #1 environmental crisis that we face in the city.
A message from Scott Stringer, Manhattan Borough President, and waterunderattack.com.
I like the idea that this particular activity is isolated from the Federal Clean Water Act, when every other activity is still under the restrictions and observations of the Federal Clean Water Act. So, to us, it just doesn't make any sense, particularly when we have these reports that show toxic fluids are showing up in these injection activities, and the consequences of those toxic fluids are having adverse circumstances inflicted upon innocent people. And we have a number of reports ourselves on that. So this is just something that we're trying to deal with in the context of the legislation that Diane DeJet talked about a little while ago. We understand that several of the witnesses claim that there is no evidence. A lot of people claim that there's no evidence that fracking has caused water contamination. But we have seen that there is water contamination in a number of places, and I mentioned those places before. Alabama, Arkansas, Colorado, Texas. I had a call yesterday from a man in Texas that was talking about the impact of these toxic chemicals on his family and how it had contaminated his water supply. So that's why we're trying to deal with this issue. And I wanted to ask Mr. Appleton if you're aware of any of the independent empirical research that has been conducted that in any way suggests that fracking does not pose a risk to water supplies. Is there any proof out there?
Well, anytime you put chemicals like are used in fracking into the environment, it's a risk to water supply if they're not properly regulated. There's also a problem that in states like New York, they don't require incidents to be reported on a systematic basis, so you can't really determine this issue either way.
Okay.
For decades, the oil and gas industry has lobbied to create a regulatory climate which has paved the way for the current drilling boom. Back in 2000, after the Bush-Cheney election, there was a dramatic acceleration in drilling activity. Both had received large contributions from oil and gas interests, and the vice president had been the chief executive of Halliburton, a major player in the drilling industry.
Meeting the needs of our growing economy also means expanding our domestic production of oil and natural gas, which are vital fuels for transportation, electricity, and manufacturing.
Whatever our hopes for developing alternative sources and for conserving energy, and that's part of our plan, the reality is that fossil fuels supply virtually 100% of our transportation needs below.
Many Democrats fought the Bush-Cheney energy policies. They felt they were shut out of the process of developing the nation's approach to energy.
This administration is a gas and oil administration, frankly, and so they're wedded to an old policy. They're wedded to a 20th century policy when we need a 21st century policy.
You have the Bush administration, you have two oilmen at the very top, and they aren't sympathetic.
They're making very serious mistakes because they've talked to themselves and the energy companies, and only themselves and the energy companies.
We don't know what other provisions may have been added in, special interest provisions that are easy to add in when you're writing one of these bills in secret.
In 2005, the administration's energy bill passed with support from members of both political parties. It provided the gas and oil industry with billions of dollars in subsidies, tax breaks, and research money.
65% of the current subsidies go to gas and oil, and you have this imbalance. We ought to have 65% or more, 80% ought to be going to alternative renewable technology, to energy efficiency.
The energy bill makes practical reforms to the oil and gas permitting process to encourage new exploration. After years of debate and division, Congress passed a good bill.
$20 a barrel.
There she is. We call it our new neighbor, neighbor 907.
We have 70 acres here, and I can't convince them that they need to drill somewhere besides 200 feet from our house.
The boom is happening all over the country. There's oil and gas operations in 32 states right now, but the Rocky Mountain states are really seeing the vast majority of the expansion.
This will be the gate to enter into my property. The old company had me completely locked out.
A split estate situation is when somebody who owns the surface of their land does not own the resources that are underneath their land. Whoever owns the surface probably can't control what happens on their own property.
You feel so helpless, you know. My great-grandfather is buried here. They totally wiped out the cemetery.
We have a very large emphasis about being a good neighbor, about doing the things that you would do in your neighborhood with your next door neighbor.
We were in bed actually sleeping, and then our son called. He said that the well was on fire.
See all them bubbles on that water up there, Bob?
Jesus, yeah.
That's all gas coming out.
Yeah, let's go ahead and light it. Oh yeah, it burns.
They don't tell you everything that's in a product. You may only get 5% of what's in that product, and the rest of it is proprietary, or they just don't give it.
Every single fracking company, they sell that theirs is the best product. It would be like divulging why your chocolate is better than somebody else's chocolate because you have those ingredients.
It's unbelievable that someone says toxic. That stuff in the pit is not hazardous and not toxic.
I have fracking fluid taken right out of a fracking truck. I've had it in my mouth, I've tasted it, and I'm just fine.
Well, around 50% of the chemicals cause such things as kidney damage, cardiovascular problems.
This is before any problems in it, before we lived in Rifle. And then everything changed.
There's no question that people are getting sick from oil and gas exploration throughout the United States. And when you ask them what their symptoms are, it's the same in one area as it is in another area.
Today, we have close to 5,000 wells that have been drilled. That's just in the northwestern area. And if you look down the road 15 years and you start contemplating 60,000 wells, what does that do?
But to me, it seems good.
The hills are alive with the sound of music.